I think this is one of the couples that I'm the most unsure about. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new, welcome to my channel. My name is Stephanie Yates Anya Buile, Steph Anya for short, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. Today I'm going to be breaking down everything that we saw unfold between Marissa and Ramses on Love is Blind Season 7. If you're curious, stay tuned. First, there will be spoilers, and also remember that I am not their therapist. I've never met these people. I'm going based off of an edited production. So there are a lot of things that we don't know about them, a lot of things we don't know about their relationships. There are a lot of parts of the conversations we saw that don't make it to the final edit. So please keep that in mind as we talk about this couple. My main focus is to help you all identify any dynamics that may be coming up in your life or the life of someone that you love, so that you have some sort of framework for what it looks like, as well as some tools for maybe how to navigate it. All right, so with these two, we really didn't see anything about them until the second episode. So I'll say that they are one of the couples that we saw the least about in the pods. With Marissa and Ramses, when we first meet them, we're learning a little bit about their background. Some of the interesting things are that Ramses was married before.
I told you I was previously married, right?
Yeah.
She was like my high school sweetheart.
We also learned that both Marissa and Ramses come from religious backgrounds. In the pods, Marissa was one of the few people who was involved in a love triangle. She was speaking with someone named Bowden. I think she refers to him as Bodie. And Bowden and Ramses have a lot of things in common, such as both being married before. And Bowden also comes from a very religious background. Ramses was raised Christian, and Marissa was actually raised Mormon. So these are very interesting and impactful backgrounds where they both have made conscious decisions to live very differently than how they were brought up.
I was just moving away from Christianity and like just like religion in general.
So I'll say that when it became between Ramses and Bowden, I was actually rooting more for Bowden and Marissa. I thought that they probably would have a really good connection just because they did have so many similarities, particularly with Bowden also coming from the military. But Marissa talks about that as if it's a con, right? She doesn't really want to date a man in the military. But I did think it was interesting that when Bowden said that it could be the same for him, that he might have doubts about dating someone in the military, how Marissa seemed to get offended by that.
Is it like a yellow flag that I was in the military?
It's definitely a yellow.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's a yellow flag for me too.
That I was in the military?
Why are you acting shocked when you said
no,
it's for me?
No.
Yeah.
I am fucking shocked.
Why?
Why is that
You
a
just said it was a yellow flag for me.
No, it's a yellow flag for you, Bodie, but not for me.
Why?
Because I'm
Don't
me.
That.
I'm
okay.
me.
Yeah, well, I'm me.
It was playful, but it made me question just enough how well Marissa would be able to handle reflections of things that she's been saying. So I was just a little curious, made a quick note, but it was nothing that I thought was problematic right away. Something else that I thought was interesting that we learned in those earlier pod dates between Marissa and Ramses is that Ramses talks about masculinity and how he never really experienced healthy masculinity. He talks about how his father was really hard on him and it caused him to also be very critical and hard on himself.
I'm just like terrible in terms of like how I critique myself. Like I never feel like it's enough. And I think like it comes from like my dad was just like very critical. I felt like whatever I did was never good enough for him. I think that was like something that sort of like just kind of creeped into like my adulthood.
I think that we actually see this impact his relationship with Marissa and ultimately impact him ending the relationship. Sometimes we see people come up in very critical environments and they're critical toward themselves. They're also critical toward their partners or maybe even friends. But I do think that that might be something that affected the way that Ramses was evaluating the situation. And we'll get to that when we get to the breakup. Marissa took a while to choose between Bowden and Ramses, but ultimately she did make a decision and she decided to move forward with Ramses. She communicated that to Bowden, and both Bowden and Ramses seemed to be good sports about that.
And I just want to be honest with you. I have feelings for you. I feel like my feelings with Ramses are
Stronger.
Strong.
Yeah.
They're stronger, but they're also like more romantic.
Okay, that's fair.
I do think it's interesting if we fast forward to the couples mixer, and when Marissa meets Bowden, she feels reaffirmed in her decision to move forward with Ramses.
Seeing Bowden, it just feels like he's a friend. No doubts about my relationship with Ramses. I made the right decision. Seeing Bowden really confirms that, if anything.
So something that Ramses said when they were in the pods that got my attention is when Marissa started sharing with him about how she does not want to deal with gender roles in her home. I imagine that with her upbringing, she probably saw a lot of traditional gender roles, and this is something that she is very adamantly against. And Ramses' response to this was
like, I do not believe in that at all.
Okay, sweet.
I want to like help and like make your load as easy as possible.
And making sure that I'm exercising my strengths in our household and supporting you in your strengths in our household. So it seemed like the thing that really made Marissa go for Ramses over Bowden was his astrological chart.
Wait, do you know your moon?
So I'm a Cancer, Leo.
Don't you dare say you are Cancer, Leo.
I'm a Cancer, Leo. Why?
I need to leave the pods.
Why?
I need to leave the pods.
Why? Is that bad?
It's so good. It's so good!
But she tells Bowden that it feels more romantic with Ramses. So here's where we start getting to the really interesting part as we look back. Marissa tells Ramses,
my fear is like, what if you just stop loving me? Guys always really like me. And my personality, my looks, I have no issue with them like being...
Like the longevity part?
Yeah, it's the longevity part.
And that is a fear that is based in her past experiences. She says that guys find her fun, but after a while, her energy becomes too much for them. This was a very eerie moment when you look back and see that that is exactly what happened. And it's hard to say if maybe she kind of implanted those fears in Ramses, or if this is just a dynamic that's constantly playing out. I did think it was interesting that she asked Ramses,
You ever think I'll be like too much?
No.
There is a hesitation before he says that she won't be. And that was the first time that I was thinking, okay, this may end up being a legitimate problem. In Ramses and Marissa's reveal, the one thing I noted is that Ramses said that he is worried about not being enough.
Is she gonna actually like be attracted to me or not? Like, am I like her type? There is that question of, am I enough?
This is something that I paid attention to because sometimes when we have people on the show who come in with a concern about being enough or being too much, that they almost project that fear and start feeling that toward their partner. And so for Ramses, he was worried that he wouldn't be enough. And then with Marissa, he tells her in the end that she is too much for him. So when they get to Mexico and Marissa is telling Ramses about the reasons why she loves him, I found a lot of what she was saying to be backhanded compliments. And a lot of times when I'm in session and I see people talking this way about their partner or their relationship, it almost feels like they're trying to convince themselves more than me or their partner. So she talks about how she used to be very anti-soft man.
Because I've talked about the type of guy I wanted to date, which is someone like you, but I never like date them. Maybe thought they were like too soft, you know, like my yeah, I love that about you.
And you can see how the things that she says resonates with Ramses. He's trying to process what's being said, what's a genuine compliment, what's backhanded. And I'm curious how you all felt about that moment. I also thought it was interesting how soon Marissa and Ramses slept together. Most of the time we find out the morning after who all slept together their first night. But with Marissa and Ramses, we didn't even have to wait for that. I think they'd already slept together during the day before we even made it to nighttime. And they both seemed to be really happy with the sexual component of the relationship. It was interesting to see, with them being the first couple to have sex, how a lot of the stressors they were experiencing in the relationship ended up being around sex and physical intimacy later down the line. So once we're back in the real world and they're having conversations about the wedding, about their backgrounds, one thing I did notice, I liked the way that they spoke with each other, but their conversations would often move from being productive to being accusatory and judgmental. So while they are filming, Marissa's in a position where she has a 2-hour commute.
How was your day?
2 hours of traffic.
Yeah.
2 hours of traffic.
I read a book years ago that talked about the impact of your commute on your overall happiness. So I do believe that going from having no commute or a short commute to having a long commute could affect a person's overall mental health in a way where they seem like a different person.
I feel overwhelmed.
I know you're like struggling with that whole commute. Like
The commute is what's actually killing me.
And we don't often talk about commute as something that's significant, but if there's anyone watching this who's had a very long commute before or has one now, it can be extremely draining as you lose precious hours or time in your day to driving and dealing with people who are also frustrated on the road. So I could understand why Marissa was feeling a little depleted with having to do this 2-hour commute. So we've seen a lot more discussions around spirituality and politics this season. One of the conversations that Marissa and Ramses had was around their wedding.
Are we doing a religious sufficient, no religion, spiritual?
His mother is a devout Christian, and Marissa actually grew up Mormon, and she rejects everything religious.
God can take a back seat.
My mom would be like tripping the fuck out right now.
I don't hate religion. Like, I guess it sounds like I hate religion. I don't hate religion.
So I thought they navigated that part of the conversation well, but then when we start talking about the military, that's where things started to take a turn. Marissa is very open about her perspective on the military.
People do not realize the brainwashing that military does. And I've been in it my whole life. I truly believed in the military.
And she also talks about growing up on bases since she was 2 years old. So they are in two very unique positions when it comes to these conversations. So they're both bringing their personal experience. Marissa being a person who has served, and Ramses' family being in a country that he says has been destabilized by the US. So this conversation that they're having is very personal, and they're pulling from their own experiences to navigate it. So in a situation like this, what is a stronger move if you and your partner have these different experiences and different perspectives is to remain curious about your partner's perspective, to say, so for you, XYZ happened, and just remaining open so you can understand more about your partner. At that point, I feel like it's not very productive for Ramses to be so adamant against what Marissa has done in her past.
I support the troops in the military. The
Okay.
military, sailors, the
Yeah.
soldiers, the Marines. I support
The people.
the people.
Yeah.
Because they were just like me, and what they sign up to do is not easy. And so I support
But they sign
them.
up for it.
We do sign up for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
If he knew that this is something that is a part of her past when they were in the pods, and now it's felt like he was using it against her.
I don't think we really understand what we're signing up for when we do it.
Okay.
What?
No, I was just.
I'm feeling judged. And
Are you?
I'm
sorry.
feeling judged.
So I think the difficulty here is that Ramses started communicating as though his perspective is the only right one. He's like, yeah, but y'all signed up for that. So he had no room for people who look at things differently from him. So that's always a bad sign in a relationship, because this is a very specific example, but it could be applied to anything that you all encounter throughout the relationship, especially when we start talking about parenting. And if you're in a position where you are unable to get out of your own experience and have sympathy or empathy for a person who's had a very different experience or perspective from you, then you're making it so that your partner does not feel safe to communicate with you if they disagree or if they're needing more clarity on your perspective.
I know you don't like my military service. I don't know if you would have wanted to be engaged to me 2 years ago.
Honestly, I probably
Probably
know.
not.
And so in that moment, I feel like Ramses really failed to keep the space secure and safe for Marissa and him to have even a disagreement, but really they weren't even disagreeing. It's like Ramses wanted Marissa to say that she regrets being in the military, but she said, honestly, if that's what you're wanting me to say, that is not my truth.
It is a huge part of my life. And I am proud of my service. I support the troops, babe. I just want you to know, I support the troops. I don't regret joining the military.
So at that point, my question was, why would you propose to someone who you knew had this history if you know that you are so adamantly against it. No judgment for his point of view, but I am questioning why you would move forward with someone if you do have that firm of an opinion. And then this conversation about the military extends to when Ramses meets Marissa's friends who have also served. It's interesting, you can kind of see it's like a child that gets caught doing something bad and they start vomiting at the mouth, over explaining. I mean, they started talking so much about how this was an issue, but they talked through it well.
Talked about trauma,
about everything,
we talked about finances, we talked about lifestyle, religion. Religion.
Yeah. Last night was probably our first moment that we had. It was, I don't even know if it's like so much a challenge.
It wasn't a challenge, but it was.
But for you, I felt like it was a challenge.
And the friends are just sitting back watching this all play out. And when that happens in therapy, which it happens all the time, you have a couple who is trying to overcompensate for the tension happening in their relationship and trying to kind of bring you up to speed and say everything is fine, we don't need to focus on this, because they really don't want to, because they know that it's something that is still unresolved. And Marissa's friends seemed pretty frustrated with his view.
This was a part of her life.
For sure. Yeah.
And like, it is, I mean, I was in as well,
Yeah.
and it's like something to be proud of, like for us, that we were obviously in, and like everyone that we served with is just like, that was a huge part of our life. And I love the military.
Then Ramses meets Marissa's family, and that was an interesting meeting because this is where we first meet Marissa's mom. You know, we've had so many times on the show where people are warning people about their parents, like, hey, they're a straight shooter, and we've seen some that have been definitely noteworthy, but this one was very, very interesting because Marissa's mom, not only does she not hold things back, but I think she seemed not to have an interest in even trying to be polite or courteous, which she doesn't have any obligation to, but I thought that that was interesting that she was so unconcerned about the cameras and how she came across. Some of the things that really stood out to me that meeting is how she talked about Ramses's look.
Kept talking about his fashion.
Which I have to say is kind of off.
Is it off?
Yeah, I'm sorry. No, I'm not feeling it. The whole 80s breakdancing, like little tail thing.
Elder Barge.
And the Jerry curl look from the 80s.
Not a fan?
Yeah, I'm not feeling it.
We can't blame his hair.
If that's what it's given, that's what it's given.
Even if she felt that way, to talk like that about not only a stranger, but also someone who could become your son-in-law, I also really was taken aback.
Mom doesn't want to come live with me, so she thinks I'm evil, but...
She is a bitch. She is bossy.
And she shared her perspective on marriage.
To me, marriage is not forever. It would be nice.
Yeah.
It would be nice if marriage lasts forever, but I don't believe in forever. It's 15 years, 20 years, God is happy when it's happy, and then it ends. You tolerate each other till it's over.
And she did ask Ramses about a prenup.
I think that you and Marissa should do a prenup. So she has worked too hard to get f***ed over and has suffered from men f***ing her over between her father, her stepfather, to then get f***ed over by her husband because he's not making enough. If you love her as much as you say you do, then you should have no problems having a prenup.
Which was interesting because, like she said, Marissa's not at a point right now where she's doing very well financially.
I have no problems with like a prenup. Like I'm not here for her money. Like I'm not here for like.
She don't have any money right now.
But they have faith that she will one day. This is where Ramses shared some perspective on his values and ethics.
Millionaires aren't ethical. I was like, listen, if she's want to be a millionaire, I was like, still not.
I want to be a billionaire.
I don't look forward to hoarding wealth.
But we can be a millionaire. Sure.
A huge part of her family narrative, she talked about it in the pods, her family talked about it, is that they grew up very, very poor.
If you look on ornaments, we were so poor that I had to hand make all those ornaments just to have.
Because we couldn't pay for them.
Yeah.
We were so poor, I didn't have mittens. I used socks as my mittens.
Yeah.
It was so embarrassing.
So typically when you have someone coming from a background like that, we look at money as the savior because it seems like the way to solve so many of the problems, whether whether it's healthcare, whether it's education. So many issues seem like they can be resolved more easily with money. And if we're honest, so many issues can be solved with money. So I wanted to know more about Marissa's perspective on Ramses saying that millionaires and billionaires are unethical because they hoard wealth. Objectively, of course, that is true. Wealth is being hoarded, but also from a personal perspective, does that affect Marissa's hopes to one day be wealthy? So one thing that we see a pattern that happens a lot with these two is that Marissa is asking for reassurance.
Are you gonna say no to me at the altar?
I feel great, baby.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any doubts?
No
Any
doubts.
creeping doubts?
No.
Any kernels of doubt?
No, I'm good. I'm locked in.
Okay, good.
But we also see Ramses asking for reassurance as well. Marissa's looking for verbal reassurance, and Ramses looks more for physical reassurance.
Make sure that we actually do have the physical intimacy, that the affection and everything that like I desire in a marriage. And so like
you're having doubts.
So Marissa says that when she is PMSing and low in vitamin D, Ramses touching her is very overstimulating.
Just maybe 3 times where I'm like, lay off on petting me or whatever. Like, I call it petting because that's what it feels like at times. Like, it's just overstimulating. Like,
yeah, and I get it, and like that's fine, babe.
Ramses seems to be a very physically affectionate person, and those touches are for him probably what reassurance feels like. Sometimes we miss that when people have the physical touch love language because we think physical touch is just about sex, and it's not just about sex. Physical touch can be hand holding, a hug, a kiss, walking past a person and rubbing their back as you do so. It is so much more than just sex. And so he said that he feels rejected when she doesn't want him to touch her. And like I said before, I think that even with the commute, the change, planning the wedding, the hormonal impact, there was a lot happening for Marissa that made her uncomfortable with that touch. And she was communicating it, saying that she felt overstimulated. Obviously, we don't want to be touching anybody who is not comfortable with us touching them. I can see for Ramses, however, why he would feel rejected. So I can see both sides of that. As long as he was respecting her request to not be touched, I can understand both perspectives when it came to him needing that physical reassurance and her feeling overstimulated. And she did show later on that once they were past the PMS, she was able to be back to the normal level of physical affection that Ramses was accustomed to. The difficulty here is that they have such a short time span to get to know each other that if you have 1 week of PMS, that's 2 out of the 8 weeks you have to decide whether or not you want to get married. That's 25% of your time together. And a person can make their decision about whether or not they're moving forward with getting married before you even get to those last couple of weeks. So I think that's one of the reasons why the expedited timeline can be such a challenge, is because there are things that can affect us for a week, 2 weeks that might not be a real reflection of who we are as a person, but absolutely impact the way that we are engaging with our partner. So this is where we start seeing their conversations around sex that I alluded to earlier. They're trying to have a conversation about birth control. And if you remember Johnny and Amy, they had very similar conversations about birth control. For Ramses and Marissa, they're trying to figure out the best birth control option. And Marissa's uncomfortable with hormonal birth control, and Ramses is saying that condom sex is not enjoyable for him.
Yeah, so I definitely don't want to like put you in a position where like you're doing something that you don't want to do.
Okay, cool. So we can disagree to have condom sex from here on out.
It's not really enjoyable, baby.
So there are other options for birth control, and I'm curious which one they ended up going with. But the other factor is that Marissa says that she'd be comfortable with them having a baby if they slip up.
Well, we could raw dog it. And like, we either have condom sex or we don't have condom sex, and we accept the consequences of not having condom sex, which sounds insane, but it's the truth. I am okay if we got pregnant.
Which I thought was very interesting, being that you're having enough doubts in this relationship that you're constantly asking Ramses if he has any doubts, yet you're comfortable to have a child with him. I thought was interesting. And they also disagree on the timeline for having children.
Yeah, at the very minimum 3 years.
Not even like 2.5.
Babe, what? Where is this coming from?
I'm just wondering.
Okay.
And so Ramses addresses in the reunion that he's not being whiny about condoms.
And it wasn't a situation where I was just being whiny and bratty and like, oh, I don't want to use a condom or whatever the sort of perception is of that conversation.
I wish he would have elaborated on that, because from my perspective, that really didn't do anything to help your case. And so interested to know, especially since Marissa revealed in the reunion that they even slept together after they broke up.
Why did she invite me over a month after the show to hang out?
Because we're all human. I was fucking that man. Like, we all do crazy shit.
What was the birth control method that they went with? I mean, it's none of our business, but since they brought it to the show, they talked about it on camera. I would love to know what the resolution was, because those kind of things could be helpful for other people at home who are having similar dilemmas. So Ramses said that he wanted to wait 3 to 5 years for kids. Marissa is uncomfortable with that.
A year from now, I'll be 32. And like, I don't think I want to try having kids at like
After
37.
By the time you hit 35, you're looking at advanced maternal age for a pregnancy. Very, very legitimate concerns coming really on both ends, because Ramses is concerned about them developing their relationship outside of having children.
I want us to have time like for us.
Marissa is concerned about them being able to have children naturally. So one thing that comes up with Marissa and Ramses is, as they're talking about the wedding, Marissa says that she feels like Ramses hasn't been very involved in the wedding planning process.
I definitely don't want to do any more wedding planning without you, I will say.
Yeah.
Which takes us back to the beginning, where she says she did not want to have to carry the mental or emotional load for the family, which is something that a lot of women have to do. Remembering appointments, remembering bills, remembering chores, so many things that in a gender traditional household, the woman is responsible for, or often becomes responsible for. And Marissa was looking at Ramses not being very involved in the wedding planning process as what could be a sign of him not being actively involved in their day-to-day life and needs.
Even though I'm really stressed, like I'm trying to pass law school and I'm commuting and I'm doing homework and papers and mock trials, and I'm also doing everything else you're doing plus the wedding stuff. It's like, I just think it's just like, I don't know.
I can do more.
Okay.
Now, Ramses, it seems from every scene that we saw, he was the one cooking and preparing meals for them. So I don't think it's fair to say that everything was falling on Marissa, but I could understand why, if that is a big point of concern for her, why that would be very worrisome. Ramses says that he wants to be more focused on the marriage.
Or even like the registry, or like the email about the song and the lineup. Like, I don't know, if I didn't bring it up, would you have thought about it?
Those things are important, but like I don't want to sound like I don't care, but like I feel like I'm just like so focused on it right now, just like making sure like us, like we're good, and we're like everything is like working between us. I guess in my head I'm like prioritizing like what's really important, like where does my energies need to go to, and like that it is important, but it's hard to like find the energy to focus on like stuff that maybe in the moment right now, it's kind of like maybe it isn't as important.
And this is something that I do work with couples with, especially when they're in that premarital phase, is making sure that you're not so consumed with planning this wedding that you're not worried about what the marriage is going to look like after that wedding. However, I think that is a cop-out on his part, because he could have been helping with the wedding and focusing on the marriage, right? Because in a way, helping with this wedding is planning for this marriage, because you are showing your fiance that you are going to be as involved as she is in the planning of your daily lives. And you're also getting a feel, there's a lot you can learn about your partner through wedding planning. You're learning about their family, you're learning about their preferences, you're learning a lot about your partner. So I'm curious, when he says he wanted to focus on the marriage, what was his suggestion for how Marissa could be doing that as well? How should they have been spending their time to focus on the marriage that maybe he felt Marissa was focusing on the wedding instead? I don't think that was constructive, because constructive would say, hey, instead of us worrying about the bridesmaid dress colors, I like us to focus on where we're going to live. You know, if he was going to be focusing on that and kind of redirecting the conversation and telling her exactly how they could be preparing for marriage, that's one thing. But to just not participate in the wedding planning under the guise of focusing on the marriage, I think was a cop-out. I'm curious what your thoughts are. So soon after that, we see them have the conversation that led to them breaking up. I thought it was interesting that Ramses is basically saying that the reason he wants to end the relationship is because he got insight that his ex-wife was actually very, very hurt after their divorce, and he never wanted to hurt someone that way.
Last night, I spoke with my niece's mother, LaDallas, and then my brother. We had a long conversation about my previous marriage, just talking about this decision and I learned about things, and like I just learned that like my ex was like hurting much more than I realized after that divorce. And like I'm just like scared that something may happen like where like I end up hurting you.
And that was surprising to me because of course she was hurt. A divorce is not a fun process. Most people, even if they're in the worst of marriages, there is an emotional component to being with the person and then legally and spiritually separating from that person. So I was very curious if that was the real reason why, because then on top of that, he admits that Marissa's energy is too much for him.
Your energy and my energy living and coexisting in the same space is what it is. Is your energy gonna be like too much for me, or is it gonna like make me feel, you know, like overwhelmed? Is it gonna be like too much for me?
And I'm curious what he meant by that. You know, is it that she gets very upset, or is she just too happy and bubbly?
But in the pods, like it felt amazing. Like it felt like I've loved feeling your energy. Like
that's what every guy feels. They love the first couple of months of dating me because it's great. The energy is just so great. Like, I get it. I've heard that before.
And I like what Nick said, you know, in the reunion.
You want to find someone who will love all of you and that part of you that is such a beautiful thing.
I know a lot of people probably won't agree with this, but I think that it is fair for Ramses to say that they're not an energy match. But I also agree with Marissa's mom, who said in the reunion,
I'm thankful he called it off. He did the right thing. That first out, he should have been honest and man enough to tell her, I'm feeling a little bit of doubt, instead of reassuring her every single time she asked him.
He should have been honest with her about that. I could see why he wasn't. If he still saw the potential for the relationship, and once you tell somebody they're too much for you, what are you telling them that for? So they can start modifying themselves so that they can always be worried now that you're going to leave. I could see why he may not share that right away. But I also do think that, you know, Marissa was asking him if he was having any doubts for a reason. She was feeling those doubts. And at that point, it probably, when she's asking you outright, especially, you could have just said, you know, I'm still evaluating how our energies match. You warned me that you might be too much, and I'm worried that I might not be able to match you where you are. Having those conversations earlier on probably would have been more helpful for Marissa, because the thing that was affecting her the most is that it felt like it was coming out of nowhere.
I just don't know how we go from like how we were like 2 days ago to this.
She didn't know if it was because he was having conversations with other people.
Don't you see that like you talk to some people and then your mind start to wonder?
She didn't know if it was because of his ex-wife. There was so much uncertainty, and it looked like she was in a pleading stance. She was almost begging. She says,
"It's like the worst heartbreak I've ever experienced. It hurts so bad."
And so, of course, it was so hard to watch her that way. I'll say that I always prefer a breakup before the wedding. I really hate seeing people make it all the way down the aisle when you know you were never going to say yes, and embarrassing a person in front of their family, especially like for the women who might have said yes, their fathers walking them down the aisle. They're never going to get that first experience of going down the aisle with their father again. So I always prefer that a person end things before the wedding if they know that they're not going to say yes. I wasn't upset about him saying that it wasn't going to work for him, and I also didn't judge him for saying that Marissa's energy was too much for him. He wasn't saying it's just too much in general. I think he thinks she's an amazing person. It was going to be too much for him, and I think that's valid. That's the point of the experiment, to see how you mix with a person in the real world. And what he was saying is that it's not really something that he thinks would work for him in the long run. That's the point of the show. I want to know, were you frustrated or upset with Ramses? I got some messages that really indicated to me that people were very, very upset with him. I wasn't. I didn't think he was cruel. I just think that he wasn't very forthcoming about his thought process as he was having these doubts. So in the reunion, I won't talk too much about the Marissa Hannah thing, but I know a lot of people want me to address it. Some of you guys think that I haven't seen the reunion when I do these videos. I just find that it's very hard. The type of videos I do, it's hard to really talk about what's happening in the reunion, because most of the time it's people going back and forth on what did and didn't happen off screen. And I'd rather talk about things that we did see. But with Marissa backing up Hannah, it was super interesting to see how the public kind of changed their perspective on her. Just a couple weeks before, everybody was very defensive of her and frustrated and angry at Ramses. Then soon after that, people were so upset with her and annoyed with her for defending Hannah. And I just think that that is so ironic that people were like, how dare you say she has too much energy? Yet that same energy she was bringing to being loyal to her friend, people were so annoyed and upset, which I get it. You know, it feels like it's not her business. But I think that if you're friends with somebody and it seems like the entire world hates them and you don't want to be a fake friend, then you're going to defend them publicly. And so honestly, sometimes it's nice to just see how these relationships between the women and between the men continue outside of the show, even if the relationships between the couples don't work out. I always like to see those relationships. And so it takes a lot for me to get really upset with any of these people on the show, because a lot of times, like I said, they remind me of clients that I have. We're all dealing with traumas. We're dealing with wounds that we're healing from. We're using defense mechanisms to protect ourselves. And so it can be very challenging to look at someone as like just the bad guy. A lot of times I can see where a person's hurt is. The biggest thing is sometimes I just question why a person would come on the show. Like, it seems like you are still very much in a healing process. Why would you be on the show? And I think that question could be asked of Ramses after experiencing what he experienced in his marriage before. Was he really ready to move forward with marriage? And I think Marissa brought up a great question when she said,
I think you should not have come to this experience. Because like, Ramses, it's very clear that you need to like live with someone for a long time before you even marry them.
3 weeks.
I think that is an extremely valid question. So those are my thoughts on Marissa and Ramses. I'm curious about your thoughts about this couple. Did you enjoy watching them? Were there any moments that really stood out to you? If you're in the live premiere with me, thank you for being here early. I love interacting with you guys and seeing your thoughts as we go. Sometimes you guys help shape my perspective on things, and I really love to see what you're thinking. I ask that you like this video, subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching this video all the way until the end. You didn't have to, but the fact that you do helps me out with the algorithm so much. So thank you.